and gentlemen, the Ooze is back!
Greetings, one and all. Welcome to the festival of Juba-lakhs, where we celebrate all the wonderful, wiggly, wobbly, and caustic creations of the demonic lord of all ooze kind. Today we'll be going over general ooze traits, some common and not so common types of oozes, and finally, some awesome items, feats, and class options that will allow NPCs and players alike to get in on the gelatinous fun. Starting off, ooze traits. Most, but not all oozes are mindless. They have no intelligence score and are immune to mind-affecting abilities. These are things like charm, compulsion, or morale effects like fear. Unless you're a mesmerist, they're one of the few player classes that can affect mindless creatures with these type of status effects. Next, oozes are generally blind. This means they're immune to gaze effects, illusions, and other sight-based abilities. To compensate, oozes have blind sense. Oozes are immune to poison, sleep, paralysis, polymorph, and stunning effects. Finally, oozes are not subject to critical hits or flanking. That can make them very difficult for classes like rogues and investigators to deal with. All of that holds true for both Pathfinder 1 and Pathfinder 2. Oozes have changed very little in the transition between systems. Now let's break down some common types of oozes that your players might run into as they adventure. Starting with that most iconic of oozes, the poster blob of D&D, the gelatinous cube. In addition to ooze traits, gelatinous cubes are immune to electricity. A gelatinous cube has an ability called Engulf. As a standard action, the cube can engulf a creature in its path. Opponents can make attacks of opportunity or dodge out of the way, with a DC 12 reflex save. Engulf creatures are pinned, take 1d6 of acid damage every turn, and may suffocate. Gelatinous cubes also have paralysis. A creature engulfed by the cube or hit by its melee attack must succeed a DC 20 fortitude save or be paralyzed for 3d6 rounds. In addition, the cube automatically engulfs a paralyzed opponent. The final noteworthy ability that gelatinous cubes have is that they are transparent. It takes a DC 15 perception check to see a motionless gelatinous cube. If a player fails to notice and they walk into the cube, they are automatically engulfed. The final note I want to give you on gelatinous cubes is that they are great for loot. This cube is going to spend all its time wandering around some dungeon eating everything it runs across, including monsters, adventurers, and even whole treasure chests can conceivably end up inside a gelatinous cube. So, if you've got some plot-important item and you want to stick it inside a gelatinous cube, it will make for a very fun boss fight. The next ooze I want to cover is the gray ooze. In addition to ooze traits, gray oozes are immune to cold and fire. The first important ability to remember when running a gray ooze is its acid ability. Unlike the weak acid of a gelatinous cube, which doesn't really dissolve metals and things like that, the much more caustic acid of the gray ooze does. If hit by the ooze's slam or constrict ability, it deals an additional d6 of acid damage to armor worn by creatures. The gray ooze has a plus 10 to its grapple ability. The only way for a player to deal with this is if they make a DC 20 reflex save to prevent the ooze from dissolving their armor. Also, a wooden or metal melee weapon that strikes a gray ooze takes 1d6 points of acid damage unless the bearer makes a DC 20 reflex save. Now, much like its gelatinous cube cousin, gray oozes are transparent. You have to make a DC 15 perception check to see a gray ooze. If you don't see it and walk into it, you take damage as if hit by its slam attack and are subject to grapple. The final common ooze I want to cover is the ever-so-delicious black pudding. Black pudding has 10-foot reach and can move on walls and ceilings. Black pudding has an acid ability, just like the gray ooze, but it deals 2d6 acid damage and a DC 21 reflex is required, if you don't want that damage being taken to your armor and weapons. Black pudding also has an ability called corrosion. If you are being constricted by the pudding, you suffer a -4 to your reflex saves to avoid the acid. This creature is really designed to eat up player equipment. Next, a truly hilarious ability that Black Pudding has, it splits. Slashing or piercing weapons do no damage, but instead cause the pudding to split into 2, each with half the old pudding's HP, rounded down. A pudding with 10 HP or less can't split and is destroyed if its health is reduced to 0 hit points. Finally, Black Puddings have suction. They can climb on inverted walls and surfaces with ease, and have a speed of 20 feet. The pudding can establish or release its suction as a standard action. Finally, the pudding gets a +10 bonus to combat maneuver defense against Bull Rush, or Awesome Blow, or any attempt to move it. Now that we have the basic oozes out of the way, let's talk about some more unusual specimens. Starting with Hungry Fog. This is an unusual gaseous ooze that's basically a cloud of negative energy. And as you'd expect, it has negative energy affinity. Hungry Fog also has DR10 penetrated by magic. It's immune to acid, electricity, and sonic, and it has cold resistance 10. Also, it can fly. Hungry Fog has a special ability called Enveloping Mist. A creature engulfed by Hungry Fog does not gain the pinned condition and is not in danger of suffocating, but they are staggered in addition to the damage caused by the Hungry Fog's negative energy attack. Next, Hungry Fog has Bewitching Broom. Any creature beginning its turn within 10 feet of the fog or enveloped in it must succeed a DC 8 will save at the start of their turn or be shaken for 1 round. Next, Hungry Fog is gaseous. That means the fog can enter small holes, even cracks, but not go underwater, and it can't manipulate objects. So basically, there's no safe place to hide. That fog can leak in under doors, through keyholes, and just be very spooky in general. Finally, Hungry Fog is vulnerable to wind. It's treated as a tiny creature for the purpose of wind effects. The last note I have about Hungry Fog is that undead love these things. Because they do negative energy damage, undead can just hang out inside the Hungry Fog and it won't bother them at all. A great use for this is if a gang of intelligent undead like ghouls have found a Hungry Fog that haunts a cemetery or battlefield that they like to feed at, use the thing as cover whenever they get attacked by players or they just run to it and retreat to it. It's also possible that a group of unintelligent undead simply move with the Hungry Fog, like the Hungry Fog sweeps into a small village bringing a horde of zombies with it. The second unusual ooze I have for you is the Globster. Globsters are an aquatic ooze that live in the ocean, feed on dead sea life, and occasionally wash in with the tide. A Globster is immune to acid, bludgeoning, and piercing. It also has resistance 10 to cold and electricity. A Globster has an ability called Create Spawn. As a full round action that does not provoke attacks of opportunity, the Globster can spit out another Globster. The new ooze will attack the nearest non-Globster target. This does 1d6 points of damage to the original Globster. They can only use this ability after they've consumed an amount of material equal to 4 medium-sized creatures. Next, Globsters have a stench aura. All creatures within 30 feet must make a DC 18 Fortitude save or be sickened. This means they take a -2 to attack and damage rolls, and saves, and ability checks. Next, Globsters have Decompose. After the giant lump of rotting flesh has been killed, it decays in 24 hours, but the stench aura remains for 1d10 days. Finally, Globsters have an ability called Nausea. Any creature struck by a Globster must make a DC 18 Fortitude save or be nauseated. This means you can't attack, cast spells, maintain concentration, or do anything that requires concentration. All you can do is take 1 move action. This effect lasts for 1 round. This is a poison effect, and once you've made the save, succeed or fail, you're immune to the nausea for 24 hours. The final uncommon ooze I want to talk about is not really a single ooze, but more a broad category. It's also coming to us from the venerated 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons. I'm talking about living spells. This is a template that can be applied to any spell effect that hits an area, not one that affects a single target. Some example spells that can be turned into wandering oozes are Fireball, Anti-Magic Field, Fear, Cloud Kill, Desecrate, Rainbow Pattern, the horrible black tentacles, or Ectoplasmic Eruption, and that's just to name a few. You can also combine 2 spells to make a wholly unique living spell ooze. One of the most important abilities your living spell has is Spell Effect. A creature hit by the living spell's slam attack is subject to the spell effect. As an example, a living spell created from a level 7 fireball would do 7d6 of fire damage. And yes, saves apply as normal, so there would be a reflex save to half that damage. Next, living spells engulf. A living spell can attempt to engulf all in its path. Creatures can make attacks of opportunity or try and dodge out of the way, with a DC equal to 10, plus the spell level, plus the Ooze's charisma modifier. A creature engulfed by a living spell is subject to the spell effect every round. Next, living spells have some defensive abilities. They have ooze traits, obviously, DR10, penetrated by magic, and SR equal to 10 plus the spell's caster level. Finally, let's determine your living spell's ability scores. They have Strength, Constitution, and Charisma equal to 10 plus the spell level. They have Dexterity and Wisdom equal to 7 plus the spell level. And obviously, they have no Intelligence modifier. If you want to see the living spell template information, you'll find a link down in the description. This will give you more important stuff like the size of your living spells and some other general abilities that they have. You can easily work these into your next Pathfinder 1 campaign because Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 are very similar. With specific ooze varieties out of the way, let's talk about some more general thematic and campaign stuff. And there's no better place to get into that than the ooze god himself, Juba-lakh. Juba-lakh is a demon lord from the abyss, and he's willing to share his caustic blessings with any who follow him. The fiendish obedience for Juba-lakh requires you to dissolve a small piece of human flesh in acid while chanting praises to Juba-lakh. This will give you a +4 to your saves against poison. If you want to unlock more powers of Ooze-dom, then I would definitely recommend going with the Evangelist boons offered by Juba-lakh. This requires you to take the Fiendish Obedience feat and the Damned Disciple feat. Alternatively, you could just take the Demoniac Prestige class. Whichever you choose, you'll get some cool features, like Deliquescent Blessing. What this means is unintelligent oozes will never attack you. And intelligent oozes, they exist and they're pretty terrifying, have a starting attitude of friendly toward you. You also get ooze empathy. This works like wild empathy, but only applies to oozes. Finally, once per day, you can transform a creature into an ooze as if you'd cast a baleful polymorph. Finally, if you are a high enough level devotee of Juba-lakh, you'll get Faceless Form. This gives you the amorphous, all-around vision, and compression universal monster abilities. Also, with your free hand, you can make a touch attack that deals 4d6 acid damage. Another great feat for the ooze inclined is the Craft Ooze feat. This feat literally allows you to cook up oozes, including gelatinous cubes, gray oozes, black puddings, and magma oozes. Now, if you're interested in character classes that have ooze-themed abilities, you might want to think about the Shifter Ooze-morph archetype. This gives you class features like Compression as the universal monster trait, an ability called Fluidic Body. This basically means an ooze is your true form and you use Alter Self to assume a humanoid form. Morphic Weapon, this allows you to make weapons from your body. Ooze Empathy, which we've already covered. Damage Reduction, and an ability to cling to walls and ceilings. Also consider the Alchemist's Bottled Ooze ability. An alchemist can create a gray ooze and throw it at enemies, and it lasts for 1 round per caster level. Also, remember the ooze is not under the alchemist's control, so it'll just run around doing whatever it wants. Now, if you're not an alchemist or you don't want to commit to putting feats or discoveries into getting the Bottled Ooze ability, you can still carry around an ooze in your pocket with Petrified Ooze. This alchemic item is a tiny petrified ooze sealed in a tin. Once the tin has been opened and the ooze is exposed to air, you have 1 minute to handle it before it becomes, acidic again. Your coin-sized petrified ooze deals 1d6 points of acid damage to anything it comes in contact with. Generally, this is used for breaking or melting whatever object it's been inserted into. It's a great way to destroy locks or traps. Finally, there's a ritual called Hag's Eye Brew. This will give you control of a Hag's Eye ooze. The casting time for this ritual is 2 weeks plus 4 hours. It requires a special component, namely a hag or witch's eye. The skill checks needed are Knowledge Dungeoneering, DC 30, you need 2 successes, and Craft Alchemy, or Profession Cook, DC 30, you need 2 successes. This ritual assumes that you're a hag, or at least a witch, and that you're going to be donating your own eye to the brew. Now, if somehow in the course of your adventures you've acquired a hag's eye, I'm not going to ask too many questions, using somebody else's will increase the DCs by 5. Then, after you've spent 2 weeks cooking up some kind of horrible caustic witch's brew, and then you do the 4-hour ritual, and you succeed, you'll end up with a willing, loyal ooze that can do things like run around, hide, and spy on things for you. Finally, I'd like to leave you with some sources of inspiration for oozes in your next Pathfinder campaign. One of my favorite sources for ooze inspiration is Magic the Gathering, which has fantastic art and hilarious flavor text for creatures like the inexorable blob, scavenging ooze, and slime molding. Also, I have to recommend the 1950s B-movie classic, The Blob, the weird, gross comedy horror movie, The Stuff, and finally, the Ghostbusters movie, because they have fantastic slime. Thank you for watching the D6 Damage DM Guide to Ooze. If you're interested in more strategy guides and class analysis for Pathfinder, check out D6 Damage on YouTube or BitChute. Also, if you want to take your game further, check out the D6 Damage Discord, featuring all kinds of helpful discussions and resources about all aspects of Pathfinder 1 and 2. The link is down in the description.